Hello, everyone. I'm David Younger,
Hi, I'm Elvin Keles.
and we created chronic illness therapy to provide support and resources for people living with chronic health conditions. Your paper is about the importance of a concept called mentalization or reflective function. And I want to sort of make that into something that is digestible, um, easy to understand, and and how we can sort of apply it and use it to coping and um, so reflection on the meaning of experiences. Like when I spoke earlier about there are things that happen to us that are outside of our control, and then it's how we relate to those experiences that really makes the difference. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and the term mentalization, and according to you and your paper, refers to an imaginative capacity to understand the mental state of oneself and others that underlies
Mm-hmm.
our behavior.
Mm-hmm.
So can you take that sort of sentence right there? Um, when you say imaginative capacity, let's make that very clear and for everyone to understand, what does that mean?
So, when we first trained for reflective functioning, this is where you and I met actually in 2003.
Right.
It feels ages ago.
Mhm.
um, so, it was very hard for me to understand because it's a foreign concept to a lot of us. So reflective functioning is actually, it's about the capacity that we can entertain the mind of the other in our head as well. So what would David have said, for example, if this was happening to him? Or if I see David's face upset for some reason, I don't immediately jump into a conclusion, but I imagine that he may have had a bad night's sleep. He didn't have a good night's sleep, so he's kind of looking frazzled and upset. Or maybe he had a difficulty with his wife, with his family. So I'm not immediately jumping into the first conclusion because he's looking at me right now. This must be about me. So I entertain different thoughts in my mind. For this, I need to create space in my mind rather than taking the easiest path and jumping onto what's visible to me. And that's a very important characteristic of, I think, reflective functioning.
Basically, in terms of what you said, um, a big, a really important component, and this is something that happens all the time, is that when we see people react in certain ways to us, it's easy to automatically assume that it's about us, which is kind of ridiculous, because it's like it's assuming that we're at the center of their lives, that they can't, whereas if someone's not in a good mood, or if someone reacts a certain way, or maybe they don't call us back, or it's like, oh, what did I do? What,
Mm-hmm.
what have I, this must be about me.
Mm-hmm.
So an important component of reflective function is to be able to think about and realize that they have their own lives and internal worlds that are going on, and there could be many reasons why they're reacting that way, and the likelihood is it's not about me.
Yeah, and I think people confuse spontaneity with impulsiveness. So a lot of people think that whatever comes to their mind first, to say that is a spontaneous reaction. In a way it is, but it's not the spontaneity that we want to strive for. It's more like compulsivity. And what mentalization is all about, and what we're trying to create, is to create that space. Maybe the things we talked about, mindfulness and being in the moment and reflecting, this is the place. It's literally about creating a moment in your
Creating
mind.
is absolutely, it's the same as in mindfulness. It's about creating a space between the impulse and the
Yeah,
reaction.
exactly. I feel so strongly about, for example, shouting at my kids when they do something that really irritates me. But then I have to really open that space up in my mind and to be able to think first, is this really necessary right now? Will this help the situation, or will this just give them the negative reinforcement they need to repeat this behavior every time they want attention from me? So what can I do next instead? So that's the space I need. And that's all about reflective functioning. And, I think mindfulness is a very important component of it. So we have described what mentalization or reflective functioning means now in terms of the psychological theory. So in my research, I found that mentalization possibly has an effect on coping with cancer. And my patients were advanced cancer patients, but I do believe that the things that we're going to discuss now are very important for all people who are chronically ill, not to mention the healthy people as well. But this is a very difficult situation, being diagnosed with advanced cancer. How does mentalization come into the picture and defines coping? This is what we're going to discuss now.
And yeah, and a big part of that, I think, is about acceptance, right?
Yes.
To deal with and accept what one is experiencing physically, but also all of the feelings that are coming up around what their situation is.
Definitely. So accepting is not, that doesn't mean, oh yes, okay, I'm gonna die, or this is the end. Accepting is, okay, so this is here now. I have to deal with this. So accepting is that this illness is now part of my identity, part of my life. This is accepting. As opposed to, I think the opposite of accepting in this case is not denying the illness. It's more like
blaming others, maybe.
Exactly. So instead of denying, the person says, oh, that doctor, can you believe he told it to me like that? Just like that. He told me that I have metastatic cancer, or if only it wasn't for them. I would just say tagging it, it's just say projecting it onto others. So it's not mine, it's theirs. This is the badness. I think that's the point. The badness is not mine, it's theirs. So it really feels like, oh, God, this badness is now all over me. I'm labeled with this illness now. It's a super scary thing. And I think we go then in those moments, we regress. And then we tend to be like, okay, it's all your fault because you made me unhappy in this marriage for all these years. Or, that job that killed me, things like that. Or that doctor, is all his fault. So these are the typical reactions of not coping so well, so to say.
And it feels like being able to process your anger amongst other feelings is so crucial here. Yeah. If you just project out the anger, and say, well, it's that this doctor didn't explain it the right way, or kind of doing that versus just the dealing with and digesting the anger that this is happening to me, and I'm so angry about it.
I think the anger is about the loss, really. And we know that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross defined these 5 stages of dealing with loss, and the first one is anger, and then denial, and then I always get confused, what are the others? The negotiation, and then the loss, and then the acceptance, right? Sorry, depression instead of loss, and then the acceptance. So sometimes people need to retreat into themselves and to process what they've just heard. And I think accepting, I have this amazing piece here which I'd like to read. It's based on a patient's report, and she says, I do everything right. I go through their therapy. I do everything. I do this, and then my tumor doubles. It's like, thanks a lot, little tumor. She laughs. You know, I really have this propriety feeling about my tumor, like it's mine. I've seen it on the screen, they've showed it to me and stuff, but you know, it's more like, it's really weird, but it's like I care about it. It's part of me. It's part of me, and it's a yucky part of me. And then the therapist says, but it's part of you. And she says, it's part of me. So, you know, I resent it, yet I'm kind of caring about it. I think this is extraordinary.
Mm.
Such an acceptance, you know, like this is also part of me. I mean, I don't know how many of us can do this. This is extraordinary.
Yeah, I mean, it's holding kind of what one could perceive as real opposites, or very conflicting feelings in the same basket. It's like me with when I think about having muscular dystrophy and all the limitations. There's that and all the challenges, but then there's also I wouldn't be who I am if it weren't for I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing. I wouldn't be as thoughtful as I am, and there are all these things that I love about who I am that are directly related to um,
Mm-hmm.
to living with muscular dystrophy. And um, it's about like holding all of these different things in the same pot, and realizing that they're not mutually exclusive. They're just complicated. It's complicated.
Mm-hmm. Totally. And I think she did not come to this point in the beginning, right at the beginning. I think this is a couple of months into her therapy.
Yeah. I mean, that it takes a lot of work to.
Definitely. So, I mean, if people feel like they cannot get to this point right away, I think that's definitely normal. I don't think any human being can do this right away, but it is certainly something that I would strive for.
I mean, for me, it took many, many years of living with denial and many years of therapy. So definitely, it's not something that um, I think usually just happens, uh, right away at the beginning without actually doing a lot of work.
Definitely. It's a process.
Yeah.
But if we are talking about a direction for our process, this would be it.
Yes. Yes. And I just another thing in terms of we're talking about dealing with difficult feelings and anger. There's
Mm-hmm.
another thing that you spoke about in the paper is the ability to talk about death, um, which is probably arguably one of the most difficult things to integrate and talk about. And
The big D. I call it the big D. Nobody wants to talk about death.
yeah,
I think the main problem is when people think, when people feel if they talk about death, they're going to bring it onto themselves.
mm,
I think it's always somewhere in there. I think accepting death will hasten it. That's how people feel, or accepting death will make it happen. I think it's absolutely human to feel this way, but thankfully it doesn't work that way. And it's not about talking in depth about death, which is okay. So when we say talking about death, why do we talk about death? I found in my research that people who are able to talk about death are better off, and we will come to that in the end. Why they're better off? What is it that makes it better for us to be able to mention death? Okay, so and in my research, what I found, what I mean by the ability to talk about death is not to talk about death in depth or in detail or in a philosophical way, just basically to be able to say, I am so scared of dying. That's it, really.
yeah.
Being able to mention that, I'm terrified that I'm going to die of this.
And you spoke about the fear that I think that obviously most fear is irrational, but it's this irrational fear that if I talk about death, if I really face it, it's more likely that it's going to happen. And that's actually one of the another characteristic that you spoke about in the paper about magical thinking, uh,
Mm-hmm.
versus maintaining a double awareness. Uh,
Yes.
and
Um, mm-hmm.
What you wanted to say a bit about what that means,
So
double.
the magical thinking in our common language, in the psychoanalytic language, is what usually children do. So if I, let's say, if I hide this, if I hide my face from others, mommy won't see me. Just I will be invisible. Or if I can just make it happen, or I can just undo something, things like that. And we all have that in us. So it doesn't mean that we're becoming childish. When faced with such a difficult situation, I think it's totally normal. But these people, when they are in therapy or when they are in an in-depth interview, what they respond as is like, oh, I don't even need to think about that, talking about death. There will be another drug trial. There will be another miracle cure. There will be another opportunity to prolong my life. So they're not even going there to entertain the idea that there is such a possibility. And this is really, it feels really like pushing you, like away. It just feels like there's such a strong defense there. As opposed to double awareness is not my concept, but double awareness is accepting that that I'm most likely to die from this illness, but yet I'm going to continue to make the most of my every single day. So I'm not going to hide under a blanket and cry every day. Well, I'm sure there will be days like that, and that would be just fair. But also, I will still enjoy my life. I will do my best to enjoy my life, to be able to do that.
The quote that you used from a paper by Rodin and Zimmerman was to tolerate one's impending death without losing hope and without relinquishing the possibility that life can be meaningful.
It's extraordinary, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think that really sort of captures the double awareness is, holding the death and the hope in, together at the same time. And boy, I mean, there's not much more that's challenging than that.
Yeah, extraordinary.
Yeah.
The other one, and that we see very commonly in most illnesses, I think you will agree with me, is to accept help from others, right. To go out there, to recruit people, just to say, I want to socialize, or I need help with preparing food, or I need help, someone taking me to the hospital, or whatever, I think this is a very interesting characteristic that defines how we cope. Do we cope well or do we cope not so well? I think the people who can do that tend to do better, tend to cope better. I mean, asking for help. And the example here is this lady speaking. After my husband died, most of my friends were couples, and it sort of got away. You're the odd woman. And eventually I joined a group called whatever the name is, Society, which is sort of a beach area, mainly a lot of people. And I eventually got up my courage and caught them and joined them. And that has been absolutely wonderful. I've got so many friends from that, when they're all single women and a few men and couples, but only a couple of people I've actually met in a group, and it's mainly women. There are a few men, but it's not to meet men, it's socializing. So she's trying to, this is an elderly lady, she's lovely. There's such a difference. I just want to read you a negative contrast. So between her, the wife, and the name of the daughter, they are my rocks, right? So yeah, I was fighting alone. Men don't. They have nothing. Empathy. Okay, we just don't. Okay, everybody knows about it, but I don't think people really want to know about it, about the details. They want to know if I'm feeling okay. Yes, okay, and how did the treatment go? Yeah, but to get into the emotional, not a chance. That's men in general, so that's nothing new. So this is the not willing to socialize bit, or wanting to get help from others, or want to talk about it. And why does it work to talk about your illness? Let's talk about that. I think it's really important. When we talk about our difficulties in life, we find a way to capture them, and it makes us feel we're in control. And as we are talking, we can identify some solutions in ourselves, nobody's telling us, or we can identify some questions that we haven't asked yet. That's what's going to help us. To be in contact with others is going to help us with that.
Right. So, I mean, on the one hand, it's a natural way to process and deal with what we're going through. And then there's just tons of research about depression and social isolation in general, irrespective of whether one is dealing with a chronic health condition, that people who isolate themselves and don't have meaningful connections tend to be more depressed and actually tend to have more physical health issues.
I totally agree. And based on my research, my findings indicated that there is such a thing called the terror management theory. So according to this theory, if death is somewhere in our minds, even if it's at the back of our minds, and we don't talk about it, it becomes sort of like this black hole, and it kind of sucks all our psychological energy in. Just to give you an example, so they did this study in Germany. They asked people in 2 different places about their opinions on immigration. So the first, they asked people, just bypassers on the street, in front of a shopping mall. And they also asked the same questions to people in front of a funeral home. Guess which ones had more negative views on immigration?
The ones in front of the funeral home.
Exactly. Because death was there in the background and nobody acknowledged it. And there is something disturbing about it. So it makes us become more critical, more judgmental, harsher, and also onto ourselves and others. And that kind of takes away all our powers for mentalization. Mentalization needs energy in order to reflect properly. We need to take care of ourselves because it requires a lot of energy. So it becomes this process where we lose our skills to deal with people and to do this and to do that. So it's a thing.
I mean, it disproves that the saying "out of sight, out of mind," and we know that when in our work, and it's just that when you don't deal with something, it doesn't make it go away. It takes up space. It takes up a tremendous amount of energy. It manifests itself in all sorts of ways that are not even, you can't even tell that it's related to the whatever it is that you're compartmentalizing and trying to ignore. So it just doesn't work. Out of sight, out of mind doesn't work. It ends up just takes up so much energy.
Okay.
So those were the main points. So just to do a bit of summarizing here, it's accepting, again, not just sort of saying, well, resigning yourself, accepting that this is what I'm dealing with, but you can still have hope at the same time. The ability to talk about death and your feelings about it. People recruiting, seeking help and connection versus isolation, and maintaining double awareness versus magical thinking. And the double awareness, again, is the sort of tolerating the difficult stuff while at the same time holding on to the possibility that life can be meaningful. And these are the things that encapsulate the fighting spirit and create a more adaptive coping in the advanced cancer patients that you work with.
Perfect.
That's a good.
Perfect.
Yeah. And on the other hand, the low reflective functioning is the sort of fault finding, blaming, and compartmentalizing, the out of sight, out of mind, isolating, like people recruiting, and the magical thinking. Just to sort of reiterate, those are the things that most likely correspond to what's called an anxious, preoccupied coping.
Very, very true. Yes, exactly.
So please, if you found this helpful, please be sure to like and share this video, and as well as please subscribe and check out our website at chronicillnesstherapy.com.